Also by Melbourne Bar. Also foreign from topic for the debate is that we regret the vilification of communism, and I hand over to Brian to chair the debate.
Welcome to the grand final of the 2019 Australasian Unjustifiable Championships last year. So, anyway, on that note, please be reminded that if you keep your phone to silent or switch off entirely, that will be a sign of respect, but also a sign of privacy to everyone debating. And as usual, whilst cheering and applause is great, please do try to do golden down speeches to a sufficient level such that we can actually hear what the speakers have to say. Without further ado, I call upon the Prime Minister to open today's debate. Here we go.
Okay, is that, yeah? When the top 1% of the world controls over 60% of the wealth in this entire universe, it is absurd for the opposition to believe that communism and the vilification of communism is what makes this world more equitable. I'm going to prove three things in this speech. Firstly, that vilification of communism is unjustifiable. Secondly, what the world looks like without that vilification is significantly better, and why that vilification in and of itself is a bad thing in the sorts of outcomes that we see in the world today. Let's look at firstly though, what communism actually stands for. So we think that what communism stands for is that it's a very broad collection of thoughts. It is distinct from capitalism in that it focuses on a collective production and an allocation of resources and goods in a more diverse way, instead of being on a price-based market structure. However, it has a huge range of intersections with the different theories of control that exist in society. For example, in most of what we see of communism in the world, it has been state-centric communism in the way that it has been like kind of practiced. We think that there are other types of communism that exist, such as anarcho-communism, in which something that we see is not practiced, in which we see the rejection of government control and small basis of small communes that exist as independent networked structures. Why is that vilification bad? What does it look like? It looks like an irrational critique being based on an explicit emotive language that exists, couched in objective extreme moral language. Things that are like, communism is evil. If you're a commie, you're a bad person. We think that the power structures in the status quo do vilify communism in an emotive way because it threatens capitalistic structures, because it threatens the way that businesses and corporations are able to operate and profit. We think that the easiest way to spread that vilification is to tie it to authoritarian regimes, which is what has occurred. We think that Pol Pot, or the way that the Japanese behaved in Southeast Asia and the Soviet Union has acted, are vilifications of communism, but are not necessarily the form of communism that exists or could exist in the world. So what does this vilification look like? So why is this vilification unjustified? We think that it is unjustified because it is just on basis vilifying a very legitimate school of economic thought. That's because communism emerged as a broad criticism of capitalism. It exists to help the grievances of the working class who struggled under a quite oppressive capitalistic structure, which they were never able to mobilize or move up. We think that the huge income inequality and the fact that the majority of corporations have GDPs higher than countries is a direct signifier of how that inequality exists in capitalism. We think that this intellectual critique is inherent in how it is important in how it shows the inherent contradictions of capitalism. We think that it is valid things like how governing society shouldn't be or how it should be, and it is a thing that should not be disregarded because of the way in which it is able to critique capitalism. We think that there is no specific proof that atrocities that have occurred from authoritarian regimes are directly tied to communism or the product of communism. That is to say, they cannot claim that Stalin or Pol Pot acted in a communistic way when they oppressed minorities. That is something that is a product of despotism, something that exists within authoritarian regimes, and we think that capitalist structures also justify war. They justify oppression in the way that the US invades lots of Middle Eastern nations. We think that the critique of these certain structures is valid. We think you can critique communism, but it does not justify the vilification of communism as an entire entity. So what does a world without this vilification look like? We think it looks like, so what occurs on the opposition side of the house, and we see that it inherently entrenches existing structures of power. That's because you limit the scope of what you are able to discuss or consider as thoughts when you vilify communism. That's because it is something that you cannot touch. Institutions do not teach it to you because they are feared of being called communist. Institutions are not able to inform the public on what communism means, meaning that the majority of individuals in the world do not know what communism means because it's something that they are just want to disassociate from. We think that when less people are able to understand or think of concepts such as what occurs in communism, we see that hierarchies are entrenched and intellectual and cultural superstructures are enforced. We think that is an incredibly bad thing. We think that next, even when those critiques are able to occur, we think when those critiques occur, you often see that other concepts which may be tied to communism but not necessarily communism are marred in vilification. That looks like the fact that socialism and communism are often used as synonymous words when they are factually not. We think that the critiques of neoliberalism, marketization, corporatization, and commodification, which are the majority of how the world operates, that's how the World Bank operates, that's how the IMF operates, are things that cannot occur and should be occurring in certain situations. We think that most often compelling critiques of capitalism occur in Marxist analysis and in intellectuals like Polanyi. That is something that means that commodification can be actually identified as a way of oppressing individuals. That does not occur when we vilify communism. We say that it is not a school of thought that can be discussed. It is a school of thought which is at the basis of that word communism inherently immoral. We think that it is significantly harder to critique these things because they are believed to be untouchable. We think that vilification of communism leads to an extreme shift to the right. It means that even being socialist in the way that Bernie Sanders was is something that is dirty, it is something that is bad, it is something that people should not support. We think that's why we see a huge swing to right populism in many countries in the US. For example, we think that seeing socialism as a dirty word, seeing communism as a dirty word is a very bad thing because it mobilizes certain voter bases in a way that means that they come out in a huge opposition to the left, they come out in a huge opposition to very progressive policies which enable social welfare programs, which enable support for the most oppressed individuals in society. We think that emotive hatred of communism, which comes from vilifying it, comes from believing that the vilification is acceptable, is historically entrenched through things like McCarthyism in America, where like politicians were believed to be rounded up and interrogated. You were told that Reds were around you, and there was a huge scare about communism. We think that that is something that has not left and will always exist on the opposition side of the house, and without that vilification would never have been an issue in that first instance. So why is our world so much better? We think that firstly, we're able to see that social structures would not be embedded in the way that they are in the status quo. That's because corporations would never have been able to develop the sorts of strength that they already have in this world, which means that even if they talk about how markets can have competition and can try to restructure and distribute wealth equally, they will never be able to do that effectively, given the way that corporations have galvanized power and already exist on a huge power asymmetry towards other forms of other power structures. We think that that is important because it means it is now too difficult to fight off that capitalistic corporate structure. But in a world where we regretted that vilification, where that vilification did not take place, that issue did not arise, and we were able to see that those corporations did not have that huge asymmetry of power. They were somewhat beholden to other schools of economic thought. We were able to discuss them in a negative, critical way. The next thing to note is regarding politics. We think that that right-wing swing that I just talked about is something that only took place in a huge strength because of the way we vilify communism. Because we think that economic problems are relating to broad disenfranchisement with democracy are something that has come from the idea that that capitalist structure is something that is superior, and the fact that you can never consider alternative economic schools of thought. We think that the constraint on that thought and the fact that the left is often tied to social communist politics means that the right has used populism and things like nationalism and racism to deal with economic issues, to deal with those sorts of problems, instead of being able to acknowledge that maybe some communist thoughts would assist. The final thing is that the vilification excludes the working class, and excludes them in a way that they are often unable to engage in these conversations because economists nowadays are all very privileged individuals who form under that banner of, communism should be vilified, we support only capitalism. And that exists because of the way we have allowed only capitalism to be filtered through in the education systems that teach on economic thoughts, which means that the majority of less educated or average workers do not have the capacity to lobby for things like government regulations or better welfare, because they cannot talk about the communist critiques which say it is wrong to have market structures which give corporations complete power. We should have more diversified social welfare programs. When they cannot engage in those conversations, they're automatically locked out. We think that being harder to critique means that when you look out those individuals, you no longer have a huge power base of people who can come and critique these sorts of things that exist in society, who can say that capitalism is unfair, it is immoral. It is not enough for the opposition to point to situations where communism has been bad, where communism has failed, because obviously we can still critique communism on our side of the house. The distinction is in vilification. You say that something should never be talked about. That word itself ends a conversation. That means that communism is something that never filters through any discussions, and people are scared to even bring up communist ideas. We supported a world in which it was not vilified. It was something that could be discussed and could counter the capitalist structures that exist in society. Proud to propose.
And thank first speaker for that speech, and call upon the first native speaker to continue the debate. be able to sustain it, continue to fight, try,
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? Because I'm going to put it too close to my mouth. Yeah? Okay? The first observation I want to make for the negative case is all the criticism of communism are fair. And we agree on the affirmative that there are some downfalls of communism. But not the burden of the affirmative is not to defend communism and its existence in isolation. It is to include communism in a discourse of economic policies that exist. Insofar as vilification is a threshold issue in which we exclude it from all public discourse, we think you can incorporate things like corporations saying it is akin to atrocities by the poor. You can critique communism in a way in which you say it doesn't perfectly capture considerations about the means of production. All those things can exist. That is not a reason to vilify communism. That is a reason to engage with communism in the public discourse. So the first thing I'm going to do is talk about what the vilification does and what the comparison in the world exists. The first thing I want to note is, to the degree, I will contest this later, to the degree that they say there are actual valid reasons why communism is bad, in that it perpetuates atrocities, leaders are assholes, and all those things, why can't that exist in public discourse? Insofar as we include communism in things like economic policies, a discussion of whether it liberates more workers or disables the means of production, and corporations actually have structural reasons for why it is not true, that will publicly be probably persuasive. People are likely to engage in their comparative and are likely to be persuaded by it. None of those reasons are reasons why we should vilify it, call it evil, tie it to atrocity, and exclude it entirely of public discourse. The second thing I want to talk about is, they kind of suggest if we have communism, I'll do this later, but we'll remove things like entirely governmental control. There will be no accessibility to any means of production for any like market capture or crap like that. The second thing I want to know is, communism in our world, absent the vilification, wouldn't exist in isolation, as it exists with capitalist schools of thought. In Chicago, economic schools of thought, it exists historically in the West. So to the degree that there is some control in the West with other versions of economic policies, this would exist simultaneously and engage a public discourse that exists. Which means, what will the inclusion of communism into public discourse look like? In some instances where there's actually just horrible corporate monopolies. Look at the IMF and the way in which neoliberalization has fucked up countries like Jamaica and half domestic production. Maybe it will be a closer swing towards pro-communism in that governments are more likely to be controlled, more likely to control the means of production, things like that. But in most circumstances, it will be a closer middle ground. We will move towards more welfare policies that are distributed, things that limit, for example, corporate monopolies that exist. It doesn't have to be communism versus capitalism. It can be a range of different varieties that exist. But you only get the variety once we incorporate it into public discourse. Because the status quo is, we kind of have like a base assumption, which is capitalism is good. The economy is an end, the economy is an end as opposed to a means to including more equitability. When a world in which that doesn't have communism in its discussion, we always engage with a righter version of economic policies, which means we never get that sort of middle ground that exists. The third thing I want to talk about is, they suggest corporations are going to monopolize this anyway, it doesn't matter. Look, the motion is regret, yeah? In a world in which we did not have the vilification of communism, where corporations were smaller, weren't able to lobby governments and prevent regulations, banks were not too big to fail, they would not have had this power that exists now. It is a world in which it would have been lesser. But the second is, if corporations are going to monopolize it anyway, surely you are making it easier on the negative, yeah? In a world in which they don't have to defend any policies, it is easier for them to squash things like the 99% who went up against the 1% in Wall Street. Yes, corporations are dicks. In a world in which you don't allow any critique by the working class, obviously that is worse. That is why the burden of this debate is not communism versus a world in which it doesn't exist. It is an inclusion of the discussion. If it fails in our life, we actually as a society come to the consensus that communism is not for us, so be it, but it must exist in discourse first to get to that point. You don't get it prematurely lead to the end of communism. Second, what does communism look like? They actually don't read shit, yeah? They were just like, communism is obviously publicly owned entirely the means of production or dissolution of the state. Great. We see there are many versions of it that exist. Just because there's the version that is most popular now doesn't suggest that there are other versions that could not exist. So in an ultra world where communism existed the same way other economic schools of thought exist like capitalism, you would have branched up in the way capitalism branched. So either social capitalism, Marxist communism that exists, it only exists in a one-dimensional framework now because we vilified it and tied it to atrocities like Pol and never we have a one-dimensional version of Marxism or communist Marxism. In a world in which it was existed in the same way that capitalism existed, it would have diversified to the degree that we say today. The second thing I want to talk about is, they kind of suggest atrocities are inherent
they say, look, the reason why we have socialism is because we have pushed and differentiated ourselves from communism. The first is, what the fuck are you talking about? In the status quo, social policies are still tied to communism. In that Bernie Sanders is a commie. Every time in India, for example, the Aam Aadmi Party wants to fight against Hindu nationalism. They are suggested to be part of the atrocities of the Japanese in Southeast Asia. The push to differentiate yourself is making liberal policies work backwards in order to get any social traction that exists. You didn't need to differentiate yourself. If you could just say, we are socialists, perhaps we are slightly communist, but here are actual reasons why we are good and engage in the importance of that policy in isolation. Why are we spending time differentiating ourselves from an ideology that we are actually quite the same with? The second is, who can differentiate themselves, right? Obviously, capitalism has a stronger monopoly in terms of differentiating. They always go, we are not like the communists. Every time you vote for socialism, you're voting for the USSR. That means the ability for them to downplay communism. The status quo is obviously worse. In a world in which communism existed to the degree that we say it would, socialism would be more acceptable because we don't tie things like welfare redistribution to things like atrocities that exist. Having established that, the next thing they say in this debate is vilification prevented these regimes from rising. I assume they're going to make the argument that if we didn't vilify communism, the USSR would have existed, Pol Pot would have existed. Right, let me give you a history lesson. It wasn't that we vilified communism, the USSR died. Yeah? The USSR was in fucking shambles, had to pull out of Afghanistan, was obviously a dwindling power in that United States future. Pol Pot was obviously something that was like atrocities that were committed, were obviously something that was opposed by the population. The king was part of the democratic movement that existed. There is no reason why we could not have prevented these regimes without vilifying. There's no reason why we could have prevented these regimes if we didn't vilify communism. In fact, if you know, communism kind of got stronger and the monopolist on these leaders got stronger because we vilified communism in that Mao Zedong and his population would be like, the West just hates us. They don't care about the average person. Obviously, in a world in which you tie Mao Zedong or like all these other communist leaders to the fact that there's a vilification of their ideology, it's easier to defend atrocities because they can get away with things like we defend the working population, we support individuals, that's how it works. So it's just really unlikely that we would have these regimes. But second, we would have gotten rid of them anyway. The next thing I want to talk about is their lack of responsibility in this debate. The status quo has corporate monopolies that exist, banks that are too large to fucking fail, and a world in which people don't have any capacity to engage. Why do you think most populations are swinging towards the right? Because the right's rhetoric is, considering we can't blame capitalism, let's find a whole host of other reasons we can blame economic poverty in the status quo. Immigrants, black people, myself, everybody. And like, obviously that's all persuasive because people aren't engaging in economic policies. Just look at the way the world is structured. Obviously there are inherent problems in the way regulations exist. And then maybe the solution isn't communism, but it's closer to communism and we don't get any of the critique, which is why we default things identity politics, which is why it's hard to get rid of entrenched monopolies that exist. For all those reasons, this debate is not communism versus none. It was an engagement in political skills. If it fails, let it fail, but we cannot prematurely allow it to die because we prematurely decided it never exists in public discourse. I beg you to propose.
Thanks to the first to speak that, so you know, Paul Hunt and Nick to speak to the PhD media. him.
Volume all right? No. Speak up. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. Because when they point to the atrocities committed by Stalin, Pol Pot, and Mao, they say it is a result of communism. But the magic of capitalism is it convinces us the atrocities committed throughout the world every day under justification of the system of private property are not crimes. Because we don't see the AIDS epidemic created in Africa by the IMF as a problem, as an atrocity. We don't see the fact that every day thousands of people around the world die of starvation while there are people with too much money to be able to count as an atrocity. We don't see the fact that people who are richer getting better legal advice, better political representation at the expense of those who are locked into systems of incarceration in private prison systems. None of those things we label as atrocities because of the convincing, the power that anti-communist rhetoric has. Because we accept capitalism as normal and dismiss all those things. That is the power of the rhetorical tool they necessarily have to defend in this debate. So, in this speech, firstly and reasonably briefly explaining why there is no validity in having the emotive critique of communism, as they say, and then specifically looking at the nature of the outcomes on political activity. So, why example bashing doesn't work at winning a debate in this state? Because obviously they need to prove a causal and not correlative link between communism and the atrocities that occur. And note there is an incredibly small number of cases to look at. So any conclusions you draw probably aren't even statistically significant to begin with. But really all they do is just list bad things that occur. But no, we could point and say it's probably more likely that those were problems with the authoritarian and dictatorial nature of those regimes. They make some suggestion that it's because communism inherently leans its way towards individual centralization. Note that entirely ignores the fact that there are different streams of communism, one of which is anarcho-communism, which has no leaders, which centers society in small little groups. And so at that point, communism can actually completely ignore those necessary causal links they make. But also note, monarchism obviously has great individual power with a large ideological strength in that individual. There have been monarchies throughout history that have not been abusive, which suggests that that individually does not necessitate the crimes that they relied on to justify this emotive abuse. Obviously, in the where they were like, we just stopped the rise of dictators, we can oppose things like despotism and dictatorial things. The problem is, and this is also important, is that there were crimes committed in the actions they said of defending it. Because Salvador Allende was a social democrat in South America who was overthrown by the US through their fear of communism to put in Pinochet, who threw political opponents out of helicopters and disappeared entire families. War crimes were committed in defense of the policy they're trying to justify. It's unclear why one is better than the other just because they support a certain ideology. And no, all of their evidence here was just premised on huge mischaracterizations set out at first. Because communism is a broad ideology. They were like, it's not Marxism. But no, Marxism as a political philosophy is inherently didactic. Marx said all of this is necessarily involved in the promotion of communism. So it's unclear how you can disassociate all the inherent ideas and analytical systems from communism writ large, but also then that they just asserted that it's about state centralization. Even though communism is about an economic system, not a system of political control, therefore there are overlaps between how you structure your society economically and you structure your society politically. In the same way that there is anarcho-capitalism and social democracy, which is still capitalistic, and there is also capitalist monarchies, you can similarly have the same process applied within communism. Therefore, the idea that it is just inherently justified because of atrocities does not hold up under any logical analysis. So, then on the question of how this influences political outcomes in the world. Note, for a team that is justifying capitalism, that is premised on the assumption of human rationality, they've decided to conveniently ignore that as a mechanism in the world. Because when they were like, social democracy is benefited because these people couldn't justify capitalism, communism, obviously all of those social democrats had the political incentive to do what was most effective. If that wouldn't be effective and they would have lost, presumably they'd do the effective thing that occurred now. But also note, all the arguments Stu gave as to why communism doesn't work can appeal to people's rationality. If you believe that, that's true. It's unclear why something that you can dismiss and argue against necessarily needs to be emotively disproved, because Ludditism is stupid, but we don't emotively hate it because you convince people that it's wrong. The problem is that you dismiss it in its entirety, which means you don't get to analyze the fact that there are certain nuances and part of it. And perhaps there should be debates about, if we are to pursue communism, what the control structures will look like. You can have debates about the fact that individual leadership and strong ideology in Stalinist and Maoist communism did not work, and therefore we should pursue perhaps anarcho-communism. Those are debates you can have, and using the evidence that exists, you can convince people. It's unclear why in a world of capitalism everyone suddenly becomes irrational when this question arises, because obviously people can question that. The comparative then is incredibly important here, because that emotive effect that stops debate from happening all has a broad range of political harms. The first is it specifically weakens the knowledge available to people, because note, people cannot learn about communism to the same easy extent. It is not taught to the same extent, which means they say do not learn certain ideas within Marxist analysis, or realize certain problems that are revealed when you analyze communism. That doesn't necessarily mean that by studying it you become a communist, but you may become more aware of social critiques necessary in society. The second thing is it then weakens critiques, because specifically Marxist theorists, we gave you the example of Polanyi, have incredibly powerful critiques of things like neoliberalism, and often critiques of neoliberalism are rooted in Marxist doctrine, because it's very hard to critique commodification without perhaps suggesting that commodification, which is inherent in capitalism, might be problematic to some extent. The problem is that then closes in a very pernicious way the windows of ideological thought that are available. The next problem is that it specifically weakens political movements. The only analysis we get in response to the fact of the analysis we gave you, that it specifically harms even social democrats or socialists, was Stu just being like, no it didn't. Well, it obviously did in the case of Bernie Sanders, because every time at every debate he was asked, are you a communist? Are you a socialist? But note also, if the capitalist structures are in control of things like education, then it's in those incentives to conflate capitalism and socialism. And note you need to study for quite a while to understand the nuanced distinctions between those two things. So uneducated voters in a populist campaign are most likely to be able to be taken advantage of in that distinction, which means socialists suffer significantly under this. And they're just like, well, socialists would be fine. We get a social democracy. We got a social democracy because of this. But note, it's been incredibly more difficult to promote things like regulation, to promote things like campaign finance reform, because all socialists, when they cross a certain threshold, particularly on questions of nationalisation and socialisation, get asked the inevitable question, are you a communist? Or they get labelled as a socialist, which because of the emotive connotations that they have created, make it incredibly impossible for them to promote those policies. That is incredibly harmful, because they're just like, well, IMF and the IMF is strong anyway. But the problem is this makes them so much more strong. And perhaps it would have been important to have better critiques of things like the military-industrial complex, things like the Chicago School of Economics, things like the Washington Consensus. And no, this occurs across a range of levels, because perhaps communism is justified and perhaps capitalism doesn't work. But perhaps just a greater left-wing and social focus in society is necessary. But even that, perhaps just a broader scope of political discourse, because at no point did they prove that people cannot choose their own fate, but they ought to be able to debate and decide for themselves across the broadest range of options available.
And thank you for the active speaker, and now calling on the third negative speaker to continue the debate. Thank you.
Everyone hear me? The largest push of this affirmative team is the vilification of communism has strengthened right-wing politics by conflating critiques of other parties and socialist policy or left-wing policy. They already lose this debate anyway. And the reason for that is incredibly simple. From first, we can set up a clear case that the vilification of communism was most important internal to countries that were on a knife edge of choosing different economic systems. That is to say, a system of social democracy, of capitalism, or of communism. Secondly, the countries were deterred from doing so because the vilification meant it was extraordinarily difficult to implement these policies. And the question then becomes, is it better to vilify or is it better to debate the specific connotations of communism? And they never rebutted the central claim we actually give you, which is that communism is essentially extraordinarily compelling. And the reason for that is that it imagines a utopia where everyone is equal and everyone is receiving the kind of benefit they claim. But secondly, it refutes specific iterations, much like Callum does, of the ways in which communism is wrong. That is to say, you argue that Leninist manifestation of communism is wrong. That specific articulation of communism led to that particular instance. It was a whole plot. It was the kind of leaders that were autocratic. That led to communism's decline. But that involved the structural analysis that we gave you from first as to why communism always structurally becomes corrupt. That is to say, it centralizes and articulates the centralization of power. It is bad economic policy because it's expansionist, and it can never be anything other than appealing to peasant laborers in a way that appeals and centralizes power and enforces power in party. So the argument we give you essentially is communism is extremely politically compelling in the intellectual abstract, and it's extraordinarily difficult to win that argument because they never even contest and engage in this part of the debate. What does the argument look like? We say, for instance, on our side, a poor country with inequality says, we need communism because our country is fundamentally unequal. And what do you say? You say, for instance, oh, we need capitalism and, the free enterprise to work. But that obviously seems like it's appealing to the conservative classes. We were never running away from that burden. So the point is, in many countries, before this critique existed, it was likely to be the case they would actually turn to socialism and communism in the first place. And that is really important because we told you that as AMRA conceded, this was extraordinarily damaging. It would have led to so much corruption, so much slaughter, so much death and decay, because it would have manifested in the way that structurally communism always manifests. Because you cannot measure the number of booths that you need to measure. You don't have the price signals that allow you to decide what you can and can't do. You don't have the accountability because ideological wars shut down all dissent. You structurally stop people from contesting. You don't have elections that challenges the way this works. That is why we really comprehensively win the debate, because their way is unfortunately extraordinarily Western-centric in countries that are extremely developed. We're talking about countries like the United States that have already a high level of economic development. We do not understand why we care about countries with 4% unemployment. If there is inequality, why does inequality matter if living standards are higher in comparison to the sorts of countries that would otherwise turn towards communism? Otherwise, we've had so much death and destruction. But in our world, has structurally turned towards different systems that have, at the very least, protected human rights, stop the kind of violations, stop the kind of atrocities that could have existed. But the second point is, and they say, well, there are various types of communism that could have existed in the first place, like anarcho-communism. That's the second point of our analysis. Elites have no incentive to allow these types of forms to develop in the first place because anarcho-communism challenges their authority. But the specific manifestation of all communist systems are good for elites. So elites are aware of the fact that communism can be used to strengthen their own power. So they jump on board and manipulate this. This is the problem their side has. Corporations aren't the only powerful individuals. It is the crowned elites, the monarchs, the wealthy people who existed in pre-communist societies that jump on board the communist bandwagon to root the state of this money, to take away funds, to stave, to slaughter, to do all these things. But they oppose this kind of thing. They oppose the political literacy. Their final claim is, well, you can argue and rationally debate, but they never prove like individuals are capable on a rational level of doing so. Most individuals are politically illiterate. It's extraordinarily difficult to engage in the kind of discussion they're talking about. Nuanced debates about the specific ways in which politics works. It's far more likely that people argue, no, that system was that system. We're going to do it better this time because we have a more effective leadership, especially when populist parties and socialist parties and communist parties are almost always led by charismatic leaders and avoiding this undergrowing claim. So there are no two questions essentially in this debate that rest and the only path to victory they have against the enormous sway of likelihood, impact, and scale of death and destruction in countries that were extraordinarily poor versus countries that in their world are already wealthy, already well off, and frankly, I don't care that Americans don't get healthcare in comparison to individuals not having to suffer slaughter in those countries. The two questions are, firstly, did it involve in regimes existing that were communist? And secondly, did it involve in the right in some way that was so substantial to overwhelm all the harms I've outlined that they didn't actually provide? Did it strengthen the communist regimes? They say finally at Callum, which is substantive material and third and all of the accredited, that war crimes were committed in the defense of these policies. But they missed the mechanism to give you at first, the deterrence factor. The fact the US intervened stopped other countries like the USSR, like China from expanding. So the next question then is, what was their incentive? Arvid says there's no incentive to do this, but obviously it intersects with other ideologies. For example, Russian nationalism and Russian claims to land in territories that functionally would have been socialist was used and justified under the guise of socialism and communism. That is to say, these countries manipulated the power of the ideology of communism to actually engage in interventions that are extraordinarily harmful. But the vilification mechanism the United States and other developed countries used allowed them to resist that kind of force. That is structurally true. But secondly, even that's not the case, the United States did not want Russia to expand to challenge their political control. That is to say, that they likely resorted to racism or other xenophobic critiques to push back against China, which would have been worse, more expansive, and more bloody. So if you do credit Callum's substantive, you flip it and show why we win the debate, because obviously all other narratives would have been worse the way they applied than this narrative. The final question is social policy. I think it's an enormous problem solution gap. That is to say, they never showed why this is enough to critique the IMF. Why? Firstly, people critique and resent taxation. They resent regulation. Powerful elites evade this. Look at the enormous burden this team has to prove. You would critique the IMF, you would control it in some way. But secondly, we provide structural reasons why that wouldn't occur. Because the United States is exceptionalist. It wants to expand its own sphere of influence and utilizes capitalism to fulfill its goal. Again, look at the nuance of our case versus the extraordinarily simplistic analysis they give you. That is to say, anti-communism links in with nationalism, but nationalism still exists as an ideology that links in with capitalism. So it's likely you would have used the IMF as an expansionist tool in other countries that weren't communist anyway, because it would have been used to articulate expansion of the sphere of American influence and Western exceptionalism, which they never challenged under their side of the house. But also, there is no explanation for why it's a sufficient critique, or why domestically would have changed. Also, it's only an intuition pump. Look at all our analysis we give you as to why capitalism's crimes were far less worse. But the final claim is, we actually don't think that social policy always works, and they never fundamentally defend why healthcare is good. Stewart tells you fundamentally important things. That too much taxation depresses the economy. It harms economic growth. It raises the bottom down, raises everyone down. We prefer a world where taxes were cut. We did have right-wing policy to some extent, because it allowed countries to grow and to prosper. It importantly sets individualism, where individual rights are more important than collective. If you read your notes, this team has never explained why it is actually good to pass this kind of policy. We have substantiated specifically why even the worst version of our case of right-wing politics functionally existing was bad. But Grace and Stu told you why the differentiation mechanism massively distinguishes this. The end of this debate, our weighing of impact was so much more substantial. It existed in countries that mattered so much more than the Western elite that were fine living in a world that was unequal when they had food on the table. That is why we win Australs 2019.
Thank you, sir. We swing to that speech now for the next guy here. Now I call upon the affirmative reply to close off today's debate.
The first thing I'm going to do is reply is ask, what will the critique of the inclusion of communism look like, and to what degree will it exist in this world? Because I kid you not, the analysis of the negative is people are dumb and people are illiterate, therefore all the persuasiveness of communism will override everything else. But their case is pretty good too. They kind of had reasons why individual rights are harmed, why there will be lower equality but relative inequality will be harmed, some India stuff, but pretty persuasive stuff, yeah? And all those things also target emotive appeals of individuals to the degree that workers deserve rights and workers deserve autonomy, which means to suggest that there is some persuasiveness in communism. There are reasons that are logical, explainable to poorer illiterate individuals why communism is bad and target that same set of emotive appeals. The point I'm making is, it is insufficient for them to say it will always be more persuasive to support communism, therefore any critique will never exist in our world. It exists in a market space of ideas where people are able to engage with it. No one's version of it to the degree that we say it exists. Which means to say our world will not have a monopoly of communism, it will have an existence of communism that it targets the specific appeals and compares itself against capitalist and capitalist versions of that argument that exist. Which means to say, they can't just say in this debate, nobody will have any critique of communism and nobody will engage in it. And the second thing I want to note is, obviously people can engage in communist critique in the way in which it literally impacts them. They want to say we are elitists, workers and people who want really stupid policies obviously are better able to understand and access the ways in which they want their welfare. This debate is about whether or not the critique should exist in public discourse, or there should be a primarily or like premature exclusion of it. The second thing I want to note is, what is this version of communism? They kind of assert that it will always be the most, like the state control, monopolies, and like we're going to erode all structures of governance. But it doesn't rely on analysis. It's a regret motion. I'm going to teach you how to debate. In a world in which we would not have had the vilification, it would diversify in the way capitalism diversified, social capitalism, neoliberal capitalism, Marxist communism, anarcho-communism. The reason why it looks the way it looks now is because we stopped it at the point at which we associated it with things like authoritarianism. So it became authoritarian communism. We never diversified the way that it exists. Which means to say, people can engage with it and engage in the debate. And if communism is actually shit, we will just exclude it from public discourse. But second, it will have a diversified version of communism that wasn't just state versus no state or control versus none. It was a nuanced version of that existence. To which the third thing is, this is fucking ridiculous. They were just like, there's always a causation between communism and capitalism. We wouldn't have thought that. For every communist leader that we left and we got rid of, we put in authoritarian leaders in most parts of the developing world. There's no reason for me to believe capitalism